Sir and Lady Iris were already waiting outside. The mother asked her son if something had happened in the temple, to which he said that nothing special had happened, and Ian just tried to keep quiet. Sarah suggested going to the magic tower, and mentioned the young man's interest in it. The boy was delighted with the idea of going there because he would like to learn how to move objects without his hands because it is convenient. The old man was seething, saying that magic is not studied for such purposes, and that there had never been a magician in Eiplet's family, so he shouldn't be fooled. The women just laughed at his grumbling, and the boy sighed heavily. When they got there, they saw a tower with blue magical streams enveloping its top. Riley said that there was a different atmosphere here, and the girl added that if they came closer, the air itself would feel different. Some people said it was because of the high level of pure mana that hovers around the top of the tower. The boy was interested in stories about magic, and in his previous life he had no unusual skills. All he had was that cursed and blessed sword, and the fields of the dead that he had to walk through by force. He was forced to live the life of the chosen one, and it constantly pressured him. He certainly wouldn't want to go through that again. Riley believed that with magic it could be completely different, especially since now his future was decided only by his choice. He wondered if his passion for magic could cure him of the traumas of his past life. Sarah told him about the mind-measuring device on the top of the tower. The girl said that everyone who wants to become a magician has to undergo such a test, and offered to do it to the boy. She said that since he had such a chance, the young man should try it. His brothers had already undergone this test to master the technique of the magic blade sword. The older one manifested mana at 12, and the younger at 14. Since Riley hadn't had the opportunity before, his mother encouraged him to try it. Even Ian was burning with anticipation. He knew that now was the time to show everyone the young master's abilities. He, as a mercenary hero, was the best in combat magic during the Great War, and the first to realize Mr. Riley's potential. And finally, the time had come when he could get rid of the stupid nickname of the Lazy Sword. They went inside the tower, the same magical streams and various objects floating in the air. Even the stairs to the top were just hanging in the air. The building seemed bigger from the inside than it was from the outside. Sarah didn't know the details, but it was due to some special device. Even the other people inside looked somehow special. The next moment, a young man with glasses approached them and asked them why they had come. Ian replied that they had come to inspect the tower, but the guy said that not everyone could get in and wanted to see their documents. After receiving them from the gray-bearded man, the guy allowed them to see the first floor, but they could not go up to the second floor without permission. And just as he was about to say that nothing could be touched with his hands, Riley was already reaching for a giant levitating blue stone. The boy with glasses grabbed him by the arm screaming and pulled him away from the stone. Riley said he was just curious, but the guy with the glasses said that even the plan from the Count's family was not allowed to touch it. He asked if they even knew what it was, but when Riley asked, the boy said he couldn't tell them. The boy was already holding his hand to his head and explaining that there were signs next to each object that said whether or not the artifact could be touched. Lady Iris asked the boy to show them around, as it was the first time they had been here, and he gladly agreed. His name was Ferda, and he stood in front of huge shelves of books and told them about the existence of many different kinds of magicians. Among them were wizards, sorcerers, and alchemists, but if we were to list them all, it would take more than a day. Ferda said that most of them wrote magic books and showed one of them in his hand. A minute later, the boy was enthusiastically showing an exhibit that turned water into ice and trying to explain how it worked. But Riley explained that it looked like a refrigerator, and when the guide asked him what it was, he had to answer that he had just made up a word. The guide led them to the center of the hall, saying that to get to the second floor, they would have to go through a certain procedure. From above, they could see beginners practicing magic, such as throwing a fireball. Riley was interested, and everyone else was waiting for him near the yellow ball in the center of the hall. Sarah said that this was the manometer that the young man wanted to try. Ian was standing next to him, and he was just burning with impatience, and could no longer watch the boy hesitate. But when he finally agreed, the bearded man beamed with happiness. The boy looked at the ball, and asked Ferd how to use it. The guy with the glasses said that he just needed to raise his hands above the sphere, then it would start to glow and fill with water depending on the owner's mana level. Ian asked the boy what would happen if the owner's mana level exceeded the sphere's limit. He thought it might explode. Ferd replied that such a person would definitely be invited to study at some magic school, especially if it was a child. But he had never met such a strong person before, and he believed that the sphere could only crack. The boy joked that they were not dragons after all, and the only one who had caused a crack in it was the great mage Astroya. During the Great War, he had defeated a famous mercenary hero, but he couldn't remember his name. Jan coughed up his words, and the women started laughing. Ferda saw that Greybeard had high hopes for Riley. He decided to start right then and there, and put his hand on the sphere. The boy was expecting something big, but he didn't see anything at all while holding his hand on the sphere. When he finished, everyone ran to the sphere to find out the result. Ferda said it was an average result, but Ian couldn't bear it. He thought it must be a mistake. Riley was happy with his average level and seriously asked if he should become a magician. The guy with glasses said that it was a pretty good result, and he would be better off learning everyday magic. The old man still didn't believe in his average level. Ferda asked if he was okay, but the next moment Yang went crazy and grabbed the magic ball. The boy tried to calm him down, because it was wrong to treat a magical object like that. But the man kept shouting that there was a mistake, and meanwhile Riley was asking what he was having for lunch. The mother said that Sarah had organized everything. The girl had booked a table at the Right Salt restaurant. Sarah told the old man to leave the balloon and come with them, and the boy who was holding him back asked for help. But Yin was not going to let her go, so the girl shouted that the young man had used magic and pointed behind him. The old man hoped that Riley had actually directed his mighty power to another object and looked back. But at that moment, Ferda snatched the ball from his hands, and he was left screaming with nothing. The girl was already grabbing him and dragging him to lunch. On the way out, Greybeard was still shouting that he couldn't just leave, because the young man's great talent was at stake, and he himself couldn't survive all those disappointed looks and the nickname of Lazy Swordsman. Ferda finally breathed a sigh of relief and put the ball back in its place. The evening came, and the boy started sweeping the hall. He was surprised at the amount of energy the old man had, but the young gentleman was touching everything with his hands. One of the mentors came down the stairs and asked the boy if he was on duty today and noticed his tired appearance. But the next moment, their attention was drawn to the crowd, which had gathered around something and was loudly wondering. The mentor decided to get closer and find out what it was. He looked back at the boy with glasses in horror, and without saying a word continued to stare at the object so that the boy ran to look. Another mentor asked who was on duty today, and Ferda still couldn't see what was so surprising. He asked what happened, and the next moment he saw a large magical blue stone. It was full of cracks, and its fragments were floating around him along with the magical streams. He did not understand how this was possible, because it is used only by great magicians, and who made it. The mentors discussed that even though they did not know who it was, if the mage Astroya found out about it, there would be a lot of noise. They thought that they needed to find the culprit first, otherwise they could be blamed. But they had no clues, so they needed to know who had visited the first floor today. They asked Ferd, who was on duty and trying to sweep the floor despite everything. But before they could speak, a stone broke into pieces behind them, causing them to scream and be heard outside the tower. A mother and son were walking down the street holding hands. She asked him if he was tired, because there was a lot of new things happening here, and the boy didn't seem too interested. Riley said that a lot had happened today. He had been to the temple and the magic tower for the first time in his life. But in fact, He was thinking that he had met a sacred maiden in that temple, whom he definitely did not want to see because he was afraid of her predictions. And in the tower, he had to collect mana in a slightly unusual way so that no one would notice. But he told his mother that since nothing unusual happened, it was a good day. The woman asked what could have happened to them, accompanied by Jan and Sarah, but turning her gaze to her husband, she said that this time something happened to him. Sarah was still trying to calm him down, because he did not believe what had happened and that it was nothing outstanding. Riley asked his mother if she was disappointed with her ordinary son, but the woman smiled and said that she was relieved. Two boys were sitting in an alley in the evening city. One of them said to Beta that they might get caught if they continued. But Beta said that the secret always comes out, but today they were working in vain. The guy asked if he really offered to pick pockets on the day of the festival. He replied that they needed to get down to business, otherwise they would have to wait until next year. Beta was looking for a target in the crowd and noticed a white-haired boy, but his partner assured him that he was definitely a count and had security behind him. Then Beta called out to Hamel again and pointed to the carefree boy with a joyful expression. These seemed to be the same people who pretended not to see the attack on the girl. The partners looked at the target, and apparently the fool was accompanied only by his mother, one maid, and that unfortunate old man. Hamel asked if his partner had really chosen them for the attack, and the man assured him that these heartless people needed to be punished for their callousness, and that it would not even be considered a crime. His partner had seen 2 aristocrats and only 2 servants, so the 4 seemed like an easy target. But Hamel had a bad feeling, and Beta reminded him that they had no choice. The partners agreed and moved forward. They mingled with the crowd and signaled each other to start. The guys were going to attack at the same time, and everyone started to act. No sooner had Hamel approached than he was spotted by the old man and received an elbow to the chest. Jen knocked him down with a kick to the leg and asked who they were. Trying to get up, he noticed that the maid was already twisting his partner's arm. The old man asked if they really thought they could attack young Mr. Iplid with impunity, which made Hamel's blood run cold. The boy had heard of an aristocrat who had achieved his status only through the sword. Sarah knocked the other attacker to the ground and immediately remembered where she had seen them. The young gentleman was right about them, and now the girl wondered where they were from, but the boy remained silent. She could smell the stench and decided that they were from Nizhnya Solia. Beta began to smell himself and claimed that he was wearing perfume, but the girl said that the smell of a commoner cannot be easily overpowered. Since she was from these parts, she would have mercy on them this time, but they would have to pay for their attempt to harm her. Sarah crushed the palm of the attacker's hand with her foot and ordered him to choose his target better next time. Meanwhile, a mother and son were enjoying the festival delicacies and asked Jan where Sarah had gone. The man said that she was away on business and that they both needed to talk. But the boy didn't want to leave and mumbled that since they were both already in business, they should do their best. Ian was surprised at his awareness of the situation, but the boy pretended not to say anything. Riley continued to walk with his mother and eat the goodies, and she even offered to wipe his face because he was too excited. But the next moment, he was distracted by a whistle, followed by flashes of fireworks in the sky, and they all watched in awe. Sarah looked up at the sky and said that it had finally begun, and Lady Iris beckoned her to join them, and asked what she was talking about. The fireworks marked the beginning of the fencing competition. In the morning, the fun continued, and the festive atmosphere was complemented by confetti floating in the air. The 4 had already taken their seats, and the fencing festival was about to begin. Seer was well prepared for the event, and had brought a whole tray of food and drinks with her. Jen assured her that this time there would be good fighters. The boy was eating his meat, and asked the old man about the program, and the latter said that it was hanging at the entrance. But Riley continued to chow down, and said that he hadn't looked closely, and the old man just lowered his head. Sarah said that there were only 3 sparring matches in the program, and that the show would most likely end before dinner. The boy looked around at the empty seats. It seemed to him that there were fewer people here than outside, and his mother also thought that it would be busy. But Sarah told him that ordinary people could not get in without an invitation letter, because the competition was between the descendants of aristocratic families. But that didn't mean they couldn't see the action, and the girl pointed to a flying crystal in the sky with a sphere on top and magical streams enveloping it. With its help, anyone can watch the action. The boy said that now some nobleman would be disgraced, and it would be shown to everyone. But the girl objected. She said that the broadcast is shown with a delay for a whole day. The broadcast is controlled by mages from the tower, and they can cut out not very suitable shots. Riley thought that even though he was stuck in the Middle Ages, technology was still replacing magic. The start of the fight was announced, and the audience began to cheer. The aristocrats began shouting at each other, trying to get the others to shut their mouths because their sons were entering the arena. Jan, with his arms crossed over his chest, did not understand why they were shouting, and did not understand their fervor. But the others understood that if a young gentleman entered the arena, the man would shout them all down. The gray-bearded man said that 2 participants from the families of Boran and Dreis were entering the arena. The 2 boys bowed to each other before the duel, and the old man added that both families were known for their swordplay, but they were no match for the house of Ippolit. The judge raised his hand, signaling the beginning of the fight. Sarah was excited to see it begin and watched the duel with delight. The swords of the opponents crossed in lunges. No one wanted to lose, and they fought as if for real. The boy said that it was interesting to some extent. He could see techniques he had not known before. He thought that there were no more techniques in the world that he didn't know, but here he met unusual techniques. When Ian asked if he really liked it, Riley said that it was like playing in a sandbox. The fight was boring and interesting at the same time. It may be strange, but that's what he came for. Sarah added that the young gentleman had been chopping down goblins left and right, that he was ready for this fight. Jan said that the boy should take part himself, but he was too lazy. The man did not understand what it meant, but Riley said that he liked his nickname of the lazy swordsman, and it was not a joke. Ian didn't understand why he was trying to hide his talents, but at the same time he noticed the real expression on the guy's face, which looked extremely tired. He thought that the boy was not only hiding his abilities, but also wearing a mask all the time, and he wondered why he had adopted that nickname in the first place. Lady Iris interrupted his thoughts. She thought that her son liked this nickname because it was just more interesting for him to live. The woman said that he needed to find him a bride, and Riley took a deep breath right into the cup of cola he was drinking, and it blew up in his face. Ian and the boy asked her if she was serious, but the woman smiled and said she was just kidding, because the old man's face was too serious. The boy said he needed to leave, and Ian went with him. Riley held his head and told him that he hadn't been caught off guard like that in a long time, and what all the talk about the bride meant. The next moment, someone called out to the boy, and behind them stood a man in a suit and a red-haired girl. Crossing his arms over his chest, the man said that he was addressing the boy, who had used some harsh words. Riley asked what he could have said, and Ian noticed the man's rudeness. The man in the suit reminded him of the childish jokes that allegedly took place in the arena. The boy had no idea how hard the participants were preparing for the sparring. He demanded that he take back his words, and that he would forgive him. Riley said briefly that he was wrong and gestured goodbye to him, taking the old man with him and walking away. But the man in the suit demanded that he stop, that his words were not sincere, and that he thought it looked like a real apology in this case. Riley lazily asked what the man wanted this time. The man couldn't stand his behavior and introduced himself. His name was Aplok, and he was the eldest son of the Arenzium family. He put his fist forward in a threatening manner, and his yellow eyes glowed with anger. The man was going to teach the boy a lesson on behalf of all the participants in the competition. The next moment, pointing his finger at the boy, He demanded that he tell him his name and family. The boy thought he shouldn't have said that, but it had been his problem even in his previous life. Jan looked at him and asked what he was going to do, and the boy said with a serious face that there was only one way out. The next moment, the boy rushed to the door, followed by a man and a red-haired girl. Jan stopped them with his arms outstretched to his sides. He could not let them go any further. But the man slipped under his arm and added that although the old man was still nimble, it was now 2 against 1. A Plok reached the boy, shouting that he would punish anyone who disrespected the honor of the nobility, and grabbed him by the shoulder. The next moment, Riley intercepted his arm and said that he had already apologized, but the man, though writhing in pain, was not going to give up so easily. He did not understand why the boy was so strong and the next moment tried to activate the magic. His hand was enveloped in streams of energy, and the boy didn't even react to it, because it was simply nothing against his mana. The energy reflected back into the attacker's hand, and he screamed in pain. The red-haired girl screamed in surprise, and Ian was surprised too. A Plok didn't understand who this guy was or how he did it, because it didn't look like he was using mana. Riley was still holding his hand, and asked him why he was being so mean to him, squeezing it harder and harder. The red-haired girl ran to help the man, and Riley threw the attacker right at her, and shouted that he just wanted a quiet life. The man was trembling, and the girl was unconscious. Behind them was a smashed wall. Riley came close to him, and whispered to listen to him carefully, asking if he was taking pills, because he could smell them from a mile away. And if he didn't want to be found out, he should be quiet. Sweat broke out on the man's face, and he agreed, frightened. Riley ordered him to keep quiet about what had happened here, or he would get him out of the ground, whether he was an Arenzium or an Orangium. Ian saw the man's reaction from afar, and asked the boy what he had said to him. The boy, with an indifferent expression, put his hand on the old man's shoulder and asked him to take care of everything here, and if anyone had any questions, he should say that he did it himself. Riley asked him to do him this favor, and he would cover for him in front of the women. The boy returned to his seat alone, and his mother noticed that he had been there for a long time. Sarah asked where Jan had gone, but it seemed that he had big problems there, and left without waiting for him. The girl asked if he had heard any sound like an explosion just now. The boy replied that he didn't think so, maybe it was the old man, and he noticed that she had good hearing in such a noisy place. Riley sat back and enjoyed his cool Coke. A new fight was about to begin, and he asked what was the highlight of this particular fight. Sarah told him that one of the participants was considered a candidate for the championship, and many people expected him to do well, including her. The girl pointed to a participant in a blue cloak who was carrying 2 swords at once. The boy thought that he looked good. Lloyd was the same at his age. Sarah said that he was the only one who was using 2 swords now, so she expected a good fight. She said that he was a member of the Janir family, and this was his first participation in such a competition. The boy wondered how he claimed the championship at the first time, and whether he was overrated. The girl told him about the existence of secret fights between the participants of the upcoming tournament. There were rumors that he used some unusual technique there, and allegedly he surpassed even the Iplik clan. The mother and son looked at her in surprise, and she added that it was written on the ticket. But the boy emphasized that when it came to swords, their clan always came first, and it turned out that they did not benefit from his good results. Sarah said it was nothing of the sort. She was pleased to see his courage and boldness. The judge announced the rules to the newly arrived participants. The match was to continue until the opponent was pushed off the field or immobilized. The participants were allowed to use mana, but if they threatened the life of their opponent, they would be disqualified, and this was decided by the judge. The participants confirmed that they understood everything, and the duel began. The guy with the 2 swords confidently took a fighting stance and was ready to fight, while the guy opposite was trembling with his sword forward. From their looks, it seemed that the winner was already decided. Riley asked the girl if she knew anything about the boy with one sword, and while she was recalling, the judge had already given the go-ahead for the fight. It seemed to Sarah that he was from Arinzium, and while she was telling him this, the boy in the blue cloak lost 2 of his swords at once. They flew into the air, and the trembling boy struck a decisive blow against his unarmed opponent. When Riley heard this name, he remembered a Pluck, who seemed to him to be the eldest son of the family. This meant that the boy in the arena could also use something forbidden. The guy in the blue cloak was immobilized, and the judge announced the winner by raising the hand of Aplion, the second son of the Arinzium family. The boy was happy that he had really won, but Riley thought that although the smell was not as strong as his brother's, he had not won by his own efforts. It was also strange that Ian was taking so long to deal with their new friends. Something could not have happened. Sarah, meanwhile, was disappointed with the fight. Her favorite had suffered a crushing defeat, but the next moment she was already offering the hosts a snack. The boy stuffed his mouth and was still thinking about the old man, hoping that nothing had happened there. At this time, Jan was picking up the girl from the floor. Although she asked him to help her master first, the man assured her that thanks to his mana, he should have less internal injuries, and that she was the one who needed help first. Ian recalled the boy's words about his quiet life and his unexpectedly strong throw by a man who had quite good abilities and did not seem weak. The old man realized that no matter how talented others were, this was a manifestation of the young gentleman's skill. And perhaps then he deliberately released only a tiny part of the mana in the tower. The old man decided that his young master was a dragon who had descended to earth, a supreme being who had lived for more than 10,000 years. Sometimes they took human accounts for fun. The old man really couldn't think of any other explanation for such great power at such a young age. It couldn't be because he himself had been present at his birth. But then it could mean that Lady Iris was actually a dragon and had been hiding her tail under her dresses all along. This would explain his extraordinary powers, but at the same time, the woman almost died of poison. And a majestic dragon can't be harmed like that, unless it was due to human error. Ian tried to recover from his thoughts, but the main thing was that his young master was an outstanding person. He shouted his last words aloud, and the wounded begged the madman to let them go. The old man began to think again. He remembered how Lady Iris had asked him to keep the battle with the goblins a secret, and now he had to keep quiet. Jan was dragging his new friends along when someone called out to him from behind. He was about to ask what they wanted, when he turned his head and saw Saint Frisia, accompanied by priests and armored guards. She was informed that there was a guest who had visited their church. Jan was worried that because of the boy's pranks they had come all the way here to get him. But it seems that Frisia had heard the cry about the young lord's majesty, and asked the old man how long he had known about it. Sarah was stretching on the podium. She was surprised that her boy, for whom she was so rooting, had lost in a second. Lady Iris asked if there would be any additional competitions, because the fights ended earlier than she expected. But Sarah answered that additional fights are prohibited by the rules. But today was only a warm-up and tomorrow they should have more interesting fights. The girl still did not expect such a fight from a member of the Arinzium family. The strength of this guy's punch could match that of Mr. Lion. Iris asked him to compare him to Riley, and the girl replied that if she hadn't seen the recent events in the forest on her way here, she wouldn't have even tried to compare them. But then the young gentleman surprised her and even impressed her, unlike the son of House Arinzium, who did not tremble or doubt his actions. But what surprised her most was his cool and serene look after the battle, and she could not say for sure who was stronger. Sarah wanted to ask the young man himself, but he disappeared again. The mother explained that he had decided to check on Yang because he had been gone too long. Sarah joked that the old man would have to be informed about the young gentleman's independent walks, and the women laughed because he would have a reaction. Lady Iris said that perhaps Riley was not after Jan at all, but was looking for a bride. Sarah thought it was just a joke, but it seemed that the mother was really worried about her son's match. The next moment, the women went in search of the two themselves. A crowd had gathered in the corridor, and it looked like something had happened. The old man seemed to be in the center of the action, but the boy was not with him. The girl tried to understand why the abbots and knights of the Temple of Salt had gathered there. The next moment, Frisia apologized for blocking the road like that, but they were looking for people from the Iplet family. Her words surprised both the girl and the mother. Meanwhile, the boy stood outside the building where no one was, and thought about the fight with a member of the Arenzium family. He held the mask in his hand and thought that he had bought it at that fair for a reason, because if that idiot didn't keep his mouth shut, things might not go as he would have liked. It looked like Jan had just said goodbye to the two, but for some reason they were heading toward Lower Salt, even though it was a long way away. The boy climbed down the castle walls, thinking that they were going to get some goods. Meanwhile, one of yesterday's attackers woke up in the tunnel, and Hamel was glad to be alive. He definitely did not expect that those 4 people were from Iplet's house. He was so unlucky to meet them, and yet so lucky to survive. Now he didn't know whether it was morning or evening, but since the magic lights were turned on again, it looked like he had been sleeping here for a whole day. He called out to his friend to see if he was still alive. Beta said that he was, and that dragging him here by himself made him feel even worse. He cursed that maid over and over again, and Hamel asked if he was okay. But the guy shouted that it definitely didn't look like he was okay. Showing his broken arm, he complained that it was over. But his partner consoled him that he only needed to go to the church to see a doctor once, and he would be fine. But Beta laughed. He did not believe that the noble upstarts from the temple would even talk to a resident of Lower Solia. Hamel tried to calm him down, but he got up and was going to take revenge on them. Although he couldn't do it himself, he was going to use that monstrosity from the magic tower. His partner shouted at him to stop and forget about everything that had happened, but he didn't listen and was already yelling at someone, ripping off a person's blanket. He shouted at the dark-haired girl to wake up. Nini asked what happened, and he told her his request. The guy said that he could not do without her help, and that was the only reason he asked for a favor. The girl stood up and agreed to help, and the guy was happy about it, and said he was counting on her. In the middle of the street of the Night City, a carriage was driving, and the winner of the last duel was telling his brother how he had knocked 2 swords out of his opponent's hands with one blow and knocked him out. But the older brother, sitting across from him, was trembling. He didn't even seem to be listening to him, and only his younger brother's hands, which tried to stir him up, brought the man to his senses. The boy asked him what had happened, and although he tried not to say anything, his face gave everything away. His younger brother asked him to trust him, because he had never been so nervous even during competitions. Aplok didn't want to hear anything and threw his brother back into his seat, repeating that nothing had happened. Once he calmed down, he assured his younger brother that he was fine and not to worry. Meanwhile, the masked man was sitting on top of the carriage and was glad that the fool knew how to keep his mouth shut, because he almost had to remind him of that. The next moment, Riley felt a sense of danger, wondering who dared to cross his path. 2 figures stood in front of the carriage driven by the red-haired girl. Nini asked Beta if this was their target, but he remembered the boy as a completely different person. For some reason, he was alone now, and riding on someone else's carriage. The girl didn't know the answer to these questions either, but she was sure he was the one they needed. The red-haired woman yelled at them to get out of the way, and at that moment Beta ordered the girl to kill the boy. The boy laughed at their arrogant attempt, and the next moment a bolt of black and purple lightning flew out of the girl's hand. It struck the red-haired girl and threw her brothers out of the carriage. Meanwhile, Riley easily jumped to the roof of the house. This time the boy was surprised. He had never seen such magical skills even in his previous life. Someone had used magic, and black magic at that. The girl in the cloak followed the enemy, who managed to escape from the attack. Riley tried to remember where he had seen this face before, and recalled the scene with the thief. Nini was delighted to be entrusted with this case. Someone needed her, and only she could handle it. The dark-haired girl couldn't let her master down. She stretched her hand forward again, and this time she was going to release a huge amount of energy. Many bolts of energy with lightning were forming above her. Riley was mesmerized by this sight, but he felt that it could be dangerous. Meanwhile, Sarah was trying to explain that Mr. Riley had been sitting next to them the last time, pointing to his seat. The girl from the temple asked where he could have gone after that, but the maid said he was going to the bathroom. Sarah's gaze burned into the old man, and she knew they needed more escorts. Lady Iris asked Saint Frisia what she was going to do, and if she was going to wait for the boy here. The girl did not answer, and only took the cup he was drinking from. Jan wondered what she was going to do. Perhaps she would use her divine powers, granted by the goddess Irene herself, right before his eyes. He was glad that his young master would be searched for in this way. Frisia looked at the chalice carefully, and the next moment smashed it in her hand with anger, surprising everyone. When she came to, she asked Lady Iris what she was talking about. Seeing this, the old man could not find a place for himself, because it meant that she was here because of the young gentleman's rudeness yesterday, and it would be better if the boy could avoid her. The next moment, the silence was broken by one of the abbots, who came running with news. He told us that something terrible had happened in the central district, and the next moment a flash of thunder illuminated everyone. At that moment, bolts of dark energy were destroying houses. Passers-by were begging for help, and one of them's hands was burning with black fire. Riley watched in fascination, because he had only seen such things in books and heard stories, but this was the first time he had seen them with his own eyes. The girl did not hold back and tried to hit the enemy, but the boy managed to dodge her blow every time. Riley looked at her young face, and wondered how someone of her age could be so skillful at this level of magic. The next moment, the cloaked girl was approached by the guards, who held their swords at the ready and demanded that she surrender. But before the man could speak, he was struck by black flames. Riley thought that Sarah shouldn't be called here, but Ian's skills would be just right. He could have tried to use the Arenzium brothers, but they were lying like firewood in the middle of the street, unconscious. The boy really didn't want to interfere, and the next moment he was dodging a series of fireballs, whose black fire destroyed everything in its path. Riley admired how easily the girl could handle magic. Maybe he should master it too. It seemed much easier than the art of the sword because it did not require physical strength. He was attracted not only by the various magical techniques, but also by the possibility of teleportation. The girl pointed her hand at him again, and the next moment a giant ice spear, in the form of a sharp block, appeared behind her. The boy, pulling out his sword, shouted at her to finally realize who she was dealing with, and the next moment cut the block in half. The girl froze in surprise, and Beta yelled at her to kill him instead of standing there. When Riley saw him, he remembered the boy and thought of Sarah and January. Because of their kindness, this had continued, and now he would have to clean up their mess. He prepared his sword, and was going to deal with him once and for all. Meanwhile, in the magic tower, the mentor was shouting at the boy with the glasses, demanding that he bring the culprit right now, before Master Astroya noticed the stone was missing. Ferda walked down the street and held his head. He was afraid that he would be expelled from the academy, but he knew nothing about the person who could do that. He remembered the boy who almost touched the stone. He seemed to be the only suspect. The guy with the glasses tried to remember his name. He seemed to be from the Eiplet family, nicknamed the Lazy Sword. But there was nothing special about him. Even his mana level was insignificant. It couldn't have been this lowlife, because even the Grand Master couldn't break off a single piece of stone. And the guy had only barely touched the stone with one finger. This version seemed so stupid, and no one would believe it. The next moment, Ferda noticed a flash. He heard the crackling and vibration of the explosion as he put his hand to the ground. He knew for sure it was a fireball. Standing up, he was almost knocked down by people fleeing from a wizard who had gone mad and was about to blow everything up. The guy with the glasses wondered what kind of madman had dared to use magic without permission, and in the central square. He broke into a run and thought he had to stop him. But in the midst of the events, he saw a girl who seemed to have been kicked out of the magic tower, and it was she who was launching those magic balls. He looked at her target, and the guy was just cutting the fireballs with a regular sword. The girl was also shocked, because she was sure that the guy had a simple steel sword, but he somehow deflected all her attacks. Although it was theoretically possible, he did it with extraordinary ease, and without any apparent use of mana. The next moment she started coughing up blood, but she couldn't let her master down, who had trusted her, and continued. She was going to attack the guy with a lot of small blows instead of putting her energy into one powerful one. The next second she sent hundreds of magic arrows at the target, and all of them were deflected by the same sword. Riley noticed that before that, the attacker had used much stronger attacks that he could easily dodge, but now they were very weak. The boy tried to understand what she was doing, because the girl froze again. Beta yelled at her and asked if she was capable of anything at all, but the girl assured him that she would fulfill her promise to her only friend. She promised to do it even if it cost her life. The next moment, dark energy was dripping down her cheek with a burn right out of her eye. Riley thought that something was wrong. The color of her mana was unusual. In her previous life, those who had it had unique abilities. But now it seemed that the magic was unstable and dangerous even for the one who used it. The girl was coughing out blood again, and blood from her eye was already pouring down her cheek. The boy realized that she couldn't even control it, and couldn't just leave it alone. The next moment, someone was shouting to pay attention to the boy, and someone in the crowd said that now they didn't have to run away because they were protected. Riley was immediately overwhelmed by memories from his past life. People were just as excited about his arrival because the warrior would save them all, and they needed his help. They called it his destiny, because he was a warrior who could handle anything. The girl ordered Beta to run away. She realized the strength of the enemy, and said that at least he would survive. Beta grabbed her and shouted that this senseless animal should not dare to die just like that. He told her that she would become just a pile of garbage with bones, but the girl was surprised to say that he seemed to trust her. But the Beta only shouted that she had to earn her bread. The guys had no other reason to take such a monster in. He was disgusted to look at her, and that's why she was chased out of the magic tower. The next moment, the boy fell down as the masked enemy approached. He said that the show was over and accused him of saying such things to the girl. He had no right to call her trash. Riley couldn't listen to him anymore, and was about to finish him off, but the next moment, the girl stretched out her hand and shouted a pillar of fire spell. Tongues of dark flame enveloped the boy and were dispelled the next moment with a swipe of her sword. The girl screamed to stay away from Beth, and the boy was surprised that she was still on his side after what she had said. She seemed even more stupid than he had been when he was a warrior defending people in his past life. The girl screamed again for Beta to run away, but the next moment the masked guy knocked her out with a light punch and told her to rest for a while. He only had a problem with this bastard, who was now shivering on the ground. Riley told him that he was not so merciful, and that he would not get off with a broken arm. He had asked for it, and the sword was already flying at him. But at that moment, someone shouted to stop, and Riley's blow was blocked by a magic shield. In the air, on a disc of magic with runes, stood an old man in a magical robe and a staff in his hand. He asked the masked man who he was. Riley realized that he had been waiting too long. Now he was facing a person with strong mana and, in addition, streams of energy were gathering around them from all sides. This energy was different from the usual, and this was not an ordinary guard, and not even a man from the temple. The magician said that if he did not want to talk, the only way out was to use force. He activated his staff, and a huge flame burst from the top of it and raged over the man. The old man introduced himself as the Grand Master of Astroya and promised to deal with him personally. A little earlier, a young man with glasses stood in the middle of the bloody room and addressed the hooded elder. He asked him to hurry to the central square, but the man said that he could only be disturbed in case of emergency. Not paying attention to the boy, he injected a purple liquid into the hand of a man. Saying that the greatest master should not be disturbed by trifles, the man added a gold coin to the already full bag. But Ferda shouted in despair that the sale of the drug would have to wait, because one of their subjects had gone missing in the central square. The old man was surprised. He thought they had all rotted away in a ditch somewhere, but here was one of them still in full force. It was really worth his attention, and he decided to warm up. The guy with the glasses added that there was another person there who could stand up to their subject. The old man now turned to the masked boy and asked him how he dared to cause disturbances on the territory of the Grand Master of Astroya. He would not get away with it. Riley responded by asking if he himself was not disgusted by his majestic title. The audience began to worry for themselves as they watched the giant fire whirlpool above the chief magician. The magician promised to personally imprison him, and the boy was happy to test his power. The next moment, the old man shouted a spell, and a giant meteor-like fireball flew at the boy. The boy decided to cut this fire into 3 pieces, and at the same time send it back to its owner. The master was furious at this impudence, and was forced to send a giant water balloon to meet him. The fire and water destroyed each other, but now there was an impenetrable vapor around the master. He couldn't believe that this dead man had not only avoided the magic attack, but had attacked with it. The master looked around to see where the enemy had gone, but the next moment a sword was flying at his back, aimed at his head. The old man barely had time to react by setting up a barrier, but it cracked and the sword passed through it, wounding him in the hand with the staff. He screamed in pain and asked how the boy dared to raise his hand against him, but the attacker was nowhere to be found. There was only a bloodied beta downstairs, and no one saw where he had gone. A procession with Saint Frisia in front was approaching the battlefield. The abbots of the church thought that a large cloud of steam that seemed to be moving toward them was dangerous. Frisia ordered everyone to stop and step forward. Raising her hand in the air, she activated the divine barrier, and a giant dome of magical energy appeared in front of them. The abbots thought that it was the magic of the Grand Master himself, but they did not understand how he could attack the saint. When the vapor dissipated, the girl noticed that he was not looking at them, but was fixated on the central square, and she said that they needed to retreat to avoid being attacked. According to the prophecy of the goddess Ironess, although she had to find him first, there were more important things to do. Meanwhile, Sarah thought that the temple servants were in a hurry, and Lady Iris said that something serious must have happened. Only Ian stood silent, but the girl had already begun to ask him why the young lord would be looking for Frisia herself. He must have known something. He didn't know what to say, and the next moment Riley appeared behind them. When he asked the old man where he was, the boy said that the old man had been missing for a long time, and that he had to go in search of him. Lady Iris said that they must have just missed each other, but Ian guessed that he had somehow learned of Saint Frisia's arrival and had hidden himself on purpose. Sarah said that since they were finally here, they could go back to their rooms. The boy and the old man walked behind them, and Riley wondered if he had solved their problem. Ian replied that they had met the saint halfway, and that he did not know what happened to the other two. Riley was glad to hear that, and he thought that he would have to visit that ragged girl in the hood sometime. He still had this stupid habit of saving the underprivileged from his previous life, so he took the girl to a safe place and returned to his own. The guardsman asked the Arenzian brothers why they had gone to Lower Salt. While the older brother was trembling, the younger one said that they had a meeting there. The man in armor asked who they were supposed to meet with, but the boy replied that they were not obliged to report such things. The guardsman did not understand why these two had come to his head, and the next moment Chervanovolosa was yelling at him. The girl demanded that the interrogation be stopped, because it was obvious that the boys had nothing to do with the incident. They were busy people, after all, and all this noise was caused by the magicians. The girl asked if the guardian really believed that the nobility of the Arinzium family, who were swordsmen, were somehow involved in magic. The next moment, she was shouting that they were victims themselves, because they had been injured and even one of their escorts had died in the disaster. The man in armor stopped her outburst with his hand and asked her to calm down first. He handed her a piece of paper and asked her to send her testimony later. The girl was furious at his meticulousness, but she took the sheet and returned to the gentleman. The red-haired woman apologized for the wait and suggested that they finish their trip for the day and have dinner somewhere. The guardsman thought as he watched them go that the girl was a two-faced animal, and the owners were no different. Nini came to an unfamiliar place. The room was locked, and the last thing she remembered was the central square in Beta. She replayed all of his words in her head, and decided that she had been abandoned again. As she replayed those words over and over again, they hurt her, and she started to cry. The next moment, the door opened and Riley appeared. She was crying that she just didn't want to be alone, but the boy interrupted her, and she finally noticed him. He stood over her and asked if she had finally come to, because she had been lying there for so long that he thought she was dead. The girl was only interested in what was wrong with Beth, but the boy had no idea and immediately asked what she had used to attack him. Riley said that no one he knew could do that, and he was interested in the details, but the girl turned away and said she didn't have to answer him. The boy asked her to at least tell him what kind of creature she was, because she didn't seem like a normal wizard because of her mana color. The boy missed the fact that it was probably a reaction of her body to some drugs. But the girl didn't understand why he wanted to know. Riley was tired of her wasting his time, and didn't seem to understand the circumstances she was in. He pulled out his sword and put it to her neck. The girl looked at him frightened, and could not believe that she would die like this. She remembered her childhood, when it was winter outside and snowing, and how she compared its color with the color of her hair and her mother's. How they rejoiced together, and she was the beauty of her parents. Then she was a beautiful silver-haired girl without a disfigured face. The girl took after her mother and hoped that by participating in the experiments of the Tower of Magicians, they would be able to live a carefree life. The girl arrived at the tower with an invitation in her hands and was already dreaming of becoming a great magician. But once in the dungeons of the tower, she was frightened by someone's pleas for help. Someone could not stand it any longer. She was handed a pill, saying that it was her turn. She looked at it and asked if she could take it, but was told that otherwise her family would not receive any money. It was the Grand Master himself, handing her the pill and telling her to try her best. And behind him, behind bars, other participants were suffering from pain. Some even begged to be killed. The next day, someone was still begging to kill him, but the magicians were jubilant over their success. They experimented with 4 stones of different energies, and this time, the mana did not evaporate but remained in the body. This promising result meant that they would be able to create higher-level mages. The girl asked if the experiment was finally over, and was told that she had done a good job. Her hair turned black, and half of her face turned red. The energy of one of the stones was now wrapped around her hand, which meant that she could now use magic. She was allowed to go home, and was glad that she no longer had to take those pills. The snow creaked under her feet, and she hurried to meet her family. She ran home, and the door was not opened. Even her own mother did not recognize her. The girl fell to her knees and screamed that it was her girl with snow-white hair, Nini. Sobbing, she asked Riley what she had done wrong, what was her fault. The girl's tears fell on the sword around her neck, and she said that she had done everything she could to not disappoint anyone. The girl asked why she had become so unhappy and unwanted in the end. The boy put the sword away and said that she could not have been happy that way. She had made a mistake in the way she was living, and should have lived differently from the beginning. Riley said he had made the same mistake and asked if she would like his help. She was surprised to hear that he really offered her help. She wanted to know how she could start over with a face and body like that, and under such circumstances. The guy said he didn't want to help her for nothing and offered her a deal. Her life was ruined by vain expectations and hopes for other people. And now she is looking for someone to rely on again. He promised to help her start from scratch and extended his hand to her. The girl did not understand why he was helping her, why an aristocrat would lend a helping hand to someone like her. Riley replied that there was no particular reason. When he looked at her, he saw himself in the past. Meanwhile, on the top floor of the tower, the magistrate was sitting, his arm already bandaged, chewing on healing herbs. His subordinates reported that they could not find the guy in the mask and asked him to forgive them. The magistrate stood up and spat out a potion and asked if they had at least found the other criminal, the bastard who had split the magic stone. But the guy with the glasses said that although they had several suspects, they had no direct evidence. The next moment, the old man grabbed the other boy by the throat and his hand burst into flames. He furiously shouted at them to stop making excuses and tell it like it is, otherwise he would burn them alive right now. The master slapped his subordinates and ordered them to finally get their act together. They were so stupid that they not only let the masked man in, but also failed to find the one who had split the stone. And as if that wasn't enough, they also let in the girl from the experiment who was raging in the square. The master asked how this could have happened, and if the masked boy was really hard to catch and there was no evidence of who broke the stone, then they had to find the girl thanks to the seal. The boy, who was already lying on the floor, said that the seal was gone, and the master did not understand what he was saying, but he insisted that it had been erased. The boy begged to believe him, and the master could check it himself. Now the elder was interested in hearing from the Arinziums, and the boy reported that because of what had happened, they had not come to the meeting. The master said that he was sorry to hear that, because it was the last chance to pick up the goods, and it looked like they could not expect good marks in the fencing tournament. The old man asked the boy with the glasses what about those two types from Nyaya Salia, whether he had them under control. When he received an affirmative answer, he said that at least they were capable of that, but he didn't want to see his stupid subordinates anymore. As the master was about to leave, Ferda asked if he was going to the basement again and asked him to stop. He asked if it was not enough to invent a cure to reach the seventh circle of magic. It no longer looked like a passion for science. But the master did not listen to him and simply teleported away. Meanwhile, the girl was asking Riley how exactly she reminded him of himself, and it didn't seem like he had been experimented on either. The boy didn't listen, he just sniffed the boxes next to them. The girl didn't understand what he was doing, and he opened a box and said that he smelled something. Taking a handful of leaves from the drawer, he asked why there was a drug warehouse in the Tower of Mages. But the next moment a blue flash illuminated them, and the master appeared behind them. He was surprised to see the girl, and she was afraid of him and began to tremble. The man was glad to see her unexpected gift, because it was harder to find her now, and he wondered how she had erased the seal. Meanwhile, Riley put on his mask and asked the elder behind the boxes if it was he who had boasted of his title as Grand Master Astrologer. The master was surprised to hear who else was there, and the boy came out and introduced himself as an old friend in a mask. Holding the leaves in his hands, the boy said that it seemed to be not so boring in the magic tower, and asked him if it was all his good. The masked guy reminded him that such things are forbidden by law in Solia, and that although he only wanted to find something related to this girl standing in front of him, he seemed to have caught a big fish. He laughed that if people found out about this warehouse, they would turn the tower upside down. The master was filled with rage and launched a fireball in their direction. The girl screamed in horror, but the next moment Riley was already in front of her and deflected the ball with his sword. He asked the old man how he could call himself a Grand Master if he threw this girl into the street. The master was furious and asked who the hell he was, but the boy said he was just a retired warrior who was passing by. The old man called the two of them miserable garbage, and shouted how dare they behave like that. He was about to launch another fireball, but the sword was faster and cut off his arm right at the shoulder. The magistrate looked at his severed limb in horror and, gritting his teeth, fell to his knees, holding the wound with his other hand. The old man was screaming about his arm. He could not believe how someone could do this to him. The boy just said that if he wanted his arm so badly, he could take it back and put it back. The magistrate shouted what kind of nonsense he was talking about, and the boy replied that he had cut one of his major arteries, and at this rate he would die here like a dog. Riley stuck his hand out to his owner and said that he would not bother him, let him take it and teleport away. Because he still had to continue his search, he asked the girl if they were close. The old man looked at him in surprise, and did not understand what he was talking about. But the masked boy was striking the stone floor with the point of his sword, and was sure that the entrance to the basement was somewhere nearby. A second later, the sword broke the stone floor, and the old man shouted in surprise. The boy was sure that he had found the place where they performed experiments on people. The magician yelled at the girl that she had betrayed them. They had given her everything and taught her magic, and in return, they had received a knife in the back. Shrouded in dark energy, the fragments of the floor began to fly around the room. The boy asked what exactly he meant by training, and the girl added that she was taught not by the old man, but by Ferda's teacher. She said that his words meant nothing to her now, and that she had met a person who would really help her. She concentrated dark energy in her left hand, and shouted that she wanted to start her life from scratch and, building up more and more energy, demanded that the old man not get in their way. The old man just shouted that they would meet again and teleported away. The boy was surprised at his long tongue. The old man had just had his arm cut off, and he still couldn't speak. The magician almost bled to death here, but since he is a wizard, he will somehow survive. The girl sat down on the floor and said that the boy was the same, as if he could have just killed him, but for some reason he cut off only his arm. Picking up his sword from the floor, Riley replied that he needed the whole picture. They walked down the stairs, and the girl asked him what he meant. The boy said that he just wanted to live a peaceful life, and then something extraordinary happened. He asked what she would do in his place, because in such cases he chooses to take a step back and stay away from everything. And even if the devil himself came out of hell, and the world went up in flames, he was interested in personally lighting the wick and enjoying it before the explosion. The boy turned to her and said with a smile that it had to be done unnoticed. And now they would do something similar. Riley opened the door and went first. The girl did not understand what was wrong with this guy's head but followed him. They got into a room with cabinets and a table with scales and different vials. The guy wanted to find the drugs they used in that experiment, but the girl didn't know what they gave her. Riley wondered how she found it in that square, because it didn't look like magic. The girl said that it really wasn't magic and pointed to her eye. She said that she just had to imagine the clothes or what the right person looked like, and then she could easily find them. The guy said it was like a radar, but the girl didn't understand what he meant, and he again said he was talking to himself. Riley asked if she had learned black magic and target detection skills here, and the girl nodded sadly. There were still other participants behind bars, begging for help. The guy said that now they needed to add fuel to the fire, and smash the locks of the cell. He was now personally setting the wick on fire. It was time to step back and watch. He threw the girl a gold coin with a coat of arms, and said that she would be free. The girl was surprised not to understand what he was talking about, not even trying to catch it. The next day, 2 participants were already standing in the arena, and the judge was explaining the rules to them. Lady Iris woke the boy up and told him that the fight was about to start. He had fallen asleep right on the stand after a long night. The woman said that this was something you don't see every day, so he shouldn't miss the show. Ian asked if one of them was from the Arenzium family, and he heard that he had already performed yesterday. Sarah enthusiastically said that it was true. This boy had defeated his opponent with 2 swords in seconds, whom she had been rooting for. She was still upset that the fight ended so quickly. Riley asked the girl if she had noticed anything when the younger Arenzium was fighting. The girl didn't understand what he was asking, but he clarified that she smelled something. The fight was about to start, and the judge was counting down to 3 seconds. It seemed to Sarah that he had really changed and smelled completely different. A second after the start of the fight, the boy screamed and dropped his sword, falling to the ground.